Okay. All right. Till Dialogues podcast, episode 6. Today we've got Bill Mackey from Worker Incorporated. It's workerincorporated.com, .org.
.com.
And Bill also teaches at the University of Arizona School of Architecture. Um, we brought him on the podcast because he's got some really interesting things to say about um, land and landmarks and how people think of land across time. In preparation for this, Bill, I got into Microsoft Flight Simulator with the VR headset, and I flew over Tucson just to sort of reorient myself because I went there for undergraduate. Um, and it just really struck me how a town of a city of, was it 500,000 people ish?
It's 1 million people in the metro area.
1 million people can be so freaking spread out, and how there cannot be a like a central highway running through it and so on. So anyways, it really blows me away every time I see it, and especially from the air, it really blew me away. But welcome, Bill.
Thank you.
Um, what can you maybe just launch into the sorts of projects that you're working on?
Yeah, I mean, one of the projects which I continually work on and have for years has to do with kind of your view from the airplane. And Tucson is kind of a special place in that the majority of the development occurred after World War II. And so everything that is set up for Tucson is set up for the car. And what that did is it kind of spread the landscape out. And so one of the things that I do with the public is these series of overlay maps. And I'll take one thing and lay it over another thing. And sometimes they're tongue in cheek, sometimes they're serious. And most of all, they're kind of like educational to have real discussions about like, what do we devote our space to? And so like there's an intersection in Tucson at Broadway and Country Club, which is like all of Tucson has these arterial streets that are commercial streets. And then inside inside that 1 mile arterial is a residential neighborhood. And so theoretically, it's a really nice system that people could actually walk from their neighborhood to a commercial area, but it just doesn't happen because of the way the rest of the landscape's set up and the way that people live, et cetera. But if you were going to walk across these intersections, it's sometimes actually impossible to do it with the amount of time that they give you. And so one of the overlay maps that I did was that intersection of Broadway and Country Club, and then showed like 3 basketball courts over it or 1 tennis court over it, just so that the public could kind of see this is the kind of scale that we've dedicated to our environment to just road. And so that led down this whole discussion on like, what is the intersection? And so back in the day, nostalgia, when we think about cities, a lot of people talk about like the center or the intersection, and the intersection is like this place, to gossip and to, have a conversation with people or to run into folks. And like Jane Jacobs, who, was an urban, forward-thinking urban person from the 60s and 50s, said the more intersections, the better. Because the more interactions that you can have with people, the better. And if you have more intersections, you're going to have more interaction. And so like in Tucson, nothing happens at the
Not the right kind of interaction, right? Like, go.
There's like rarely do you see a pedestrian at an intersection.
Is that
And
because of the heat,
so,
or is it like a deeper design issue?
well, it's part of that car, infrastructure that
Yeah.
the city was built when the car was the major means of transportation and distribution. And so you can look at cities And usually their framework, like the way that they're made, or the way that the roads and the private property is developed, is usually based on how the city moved goods from one point to the other. And unfortunately, most of Tucson, that occurred after World War II, when everybody had a car. But like downtown, in downtown Tucson, that's, been around since the 1880s, 1870s, when the railroad came. And so there was a railroad and horses. And so it has a different kind of grid alignment, let's say, than the rest of the city. And so there was a developer that, downtown Tucson is not different from most downtowns. It went through its heyday in the 50s. And then because of either economic or racial um, strife and segregation, things changed for the downtown scene. And it became kind of a desolate place during the 70s. And in the 80s, there was kind of a rebirth, or late 80s, there started to be a rebirth by all the hipsters and artists. And then finally in the 2000s, it's undergone like a big rebirth, like most downtowns. And there was a developer that's been doing a lot of that rebirth, and he was really interested in promoting what he was doing. And what he was doing was he was assembling all the properties around this one intersection, Fifth and Congress. He was developing the north west corner, the southwest corner, and he was also involved with the southeast corner of that one particular intersection. And so he said, we'd like to do some sort of event. He called me up. He knew I was doing these like exhibits and vacant storefronts in downtown. And he's like, and I want to celebrate what I'm doing without really pointing out that I'm doing it, because he didn't want to be like egotistical or whatever. He just wanted to celebrate his vision. And so we did an installation called Centers and Street Corners. And so it was this whole exhibit was kind of this participatory exhibit where people that came to the empty storefront could talk about what a center means, what they'd like to see at an intersection, what they consider an intersection to be, where they consider the center of town to be. Um, and one part of that was the beginning of Guess That Intersection game, where I went around and took pictures of like 65 intersections in town from the southwest corner looking to the northeast, and made a book where people were able to guess which intersection was what. And of course, like no one can guess it because it's like completely mundane and generic everywhere you look in
They all
Tucson,
look the
except
same.
for like the little part of town in downtown.
It's a oh, I can't remember who it was. It was an urban planner who, they asked him how he decided where to put sidewalks, and he said, "I watch where people walk." And I think like when I look at these new these revitalization projects for downtown areas, like I was in Tucson for 5 years. I didn't even know there was a downtown. Like I thought it was uh, Fourth
Fourth
Street or Fourth,
Avenue.
Fourth Avenue. I thought that was downtown to me, right? That's as far as I ever ventured. I didn't know there was skyscrapers and stuff. But when I look at a place like Tempe or Tucson having a revitalized downtown, how much of that is top down, like best practices from what we know about how to plan a space, and how much of it is bottom up, just like watching how people use the space and then building the infrastructure around that?
Um, I mean, it's tough. I mean, downtown already has its, layout. Like it's
Yeah.
that I think that person was Jan Gell that mentioned like watching where people walk. And that happens like more in kind of campus settings. But like, downtown's got the sidewalks and the buildings set up. I mean, I'll tell you, and people at the city aren't going to like what I have to say, but it's top down. There's a case in point. There was this project called Aviation Highway. And in 1979, the city of Tucson and the Arizona Department of Transportation felt like it would be a good idea to have this highway cut through around the tracks that actually separates Fourth Avenue from downtown. Like Fourth Avenue is right next to downtown, and that you didn't know that downtown was right next to Fourth Avenue is like
Yeah.
appropriate because there's an underpass and there's very little like physical mental connection between the two. But the state decided there would be like this elevated highway that would like cut through town so that people on the southeast side could get to the highway without having to drive through the congested downtown area with one-way streets and all that shit. And so that was 1979. In 1984, something changed. In 1990, something changed. In 1992, something changed. And they went through all these iterations. In the meantime, all these warehouses were starting to get occupied by artists and hipsters setting up music clubs and art galleries and all that stuff. And the state was like, okay, you can do that. Fire marshal would come in, let them occupy the building, etc., while they were trying to figure out what to do. Finally, in 2022, the road was built. And it's a completely different road than what they showed in the beginning, but it became a little bit more of a street on grade thing, and that was more out of money than anything. And what they did is they cut off the bicycle and the pedestrian connections between the Fourth Avenue area and the warehouse district and downtown. And that was a complete, and then some people would say, oh, they made the underpass better or this or that. But they really took the only on grade way of getting from one area of town to downtown. And that was the exact opposite of what, I think you're quoting Jan Gehl on saying this is what people do.
Yeah.
And they took it away. And the only reason they did that whole project was they had money earmarked for it from the federal government and they didn't want to give it back. So, and
It's
I did a
interesting.
April Fool's thing on it back in, I can't remember what year, before 2020, a few years before COVID, maybe 2015, I have no idea. But the April Fool's thing was they were gonna scrap the roadway project and they were gonna pick up a golf course that they were gonna decommission basically on the east side and place it in this, and the original road was called Downtown Links, and so they were calling Downtown Links to replace Downtown Links, and we did this newspaper article on it and it was all fake, and the mayor got upset and didn't think the thing was funny at all.
So that's one thing that when we talked before, and I noticed it in your materials that you like to use a lot of humor and a lot of sarcasm, but the way that you do it feels not sardonic, but caring. So have you found that that's a useful way to engage people on like difficult topics?
I don't know if it's useful because like grants I get are like 1 in 10, 1 in 7, whatever. And so I think some people find sarcasm to be okay, and definitely some people don't. It's the only way I can do it. It's what I know how to do. And it's a tough thing because I find it funny. Like I like pointing out, kind of like ridiculousness of things, and making fun of it and making fun of ourselves. And I think some people don't.
Yeah,
I try to be caring about it. Like I try to add self-deprecation to it, or like, listen, I'm part of the game.
yeah,
I'm part of this, or we're all part of it, or we have no control over it. But let's look at it kind of humorously, turn it on its head, whatever, to try and um, implement some sort of change. And
It
so
seems like
that's where it's all that's what it's all about. And again, I don't know how useful it is. The older I get and the more grant rejections I get for my projects, I realize that maybe it isn't as useful and I need to be more earnest.
well, if you crack the code on how to do it usefully, I'd love to know it. Because I think humor is a really important component of change management. Just being able to laugh at, are we doing this because it's how we've always done it, or does it make sense? It's like, oh, okay, we were just being lazy. But and actually, Julia Mossbridge, the co-founder of Tilt, her partner is what he calls a change jester, where he goes into corporate offices who are very, very entrenched, and they're not facing the realities of the changing environment. And he kind of helps loosen them up in order to like have sort of like blameless change going forward. I think it's a really neat way to frame yourself as a sort of like a court jester. But
Yeah. And I've been labeled that at the School of Architecture. There were a couple of professors that would say, Bill's the guy in the Shakespeare novel that all of a sudden he goes like, what is going on here? Everybody take a look at this. And I think it works. But then people get tired of it. So so I've been in Tucson for 30 years and I've been doing this artwork stuff publicly with exhibitions um, for 20 years. And, after I did like the 14th exhibition in this period of 10 years, I think people started getting tired of it.
Mm,
And so like now what I've been doing are just like these nice little publications that are are sarcastic, but they're also very endearing.
yeah.
Like the guess that intersection, which was completely sarcastic, laughing at our environment, um, to guess that arroyo, which is, you know, not laughing at the way that our landscape has treated arroyos, which are washes, which
Yeah.
are small, tiny, like tributaries or streams or creeks that go to larger rivers, but in Tucson, they're dry unless it rains.
And they're
Um,
sunken like a little bit.
they're sunken into the landscape and they take all sorts of form in the city. They can be a street, they can be a concrete ditch, they can be nature, with trees and bushes and butterflies. They can be wildlife corridors. They can be places for homeless. They could be places for teens to hang out and smoke dope. So they have this whole kind of like culture associated with it. And that last book was really like embracing it and really trying to like again, the motivation for everything is to kind of, make things better in the environment and not using sarcasm, as heavily as I did with like guess that intersection. So there, maybe I'm just getting a little older and a little more sentimental and nostalgic about
Yeah.
shit. And I don't want to be, the dick that talks about this or that everyone knows exists, but no one cares to do anything about.
Yeah. When you talk about natural wonders like the washes, like I think it's hard not to be awe-inspired. And I think when you say you've been there for 30 years, uh, I imagine there's people who've been there for 60 years. Do you still, even though you've been there for 30 years, do you still get treated like sort of like the new guy or the gentrifier or something?
I don't think so. Not that I know of. I think once you're in Tucson, I would guess once you're in Tucson for about 10 years, people
You're
consider you
local.
part of the community.
Cool.
I don't think I mean, there's not that, I don't think there's that like there is in other communities that I've seen. Like Seattle seems like a kind of place that's like really nativistic,
Yeah.
like, at least that's what I noticed when I lived there for a short period of time. But I mean, I think people were like, if you've been in Tucson for 10 years, you've survived the summers and good for
Yeah.
you. You're part of the community.
And then that community fluctuates quite a bit. Or it's probably not as pronounced as it was in the 90s when I was there, but I stayed over the summer 1 year and just noticed that everything, uh, uh, pretty much everything changed when all the students left. Like, how do you run a community that's got, or how do you have community that has, what is it, maybe 20% of the 10% of the population just leaves for 3 months?
I don't know. I mean, one of the things that I had an exhibit about the relationship between downtown and the university. And this was an exhibit that I coordinated with students within the honors college. And so they weren't like artists or architects or anything. Some were like computer science majors, but they were really interested in understanding that relationship. And it doesn't really exist. I think there's a lot of second guessing or stereotyping, by the community in Tucson, that anybody that goes to U of A is a rich person from California
Um,
that is just there to get a degree and move on to somewhere else and not live in Tucson. That's like the whatever stereotype. Um, and that the engagement between even the faculty at the university and the community in Tucson is probably not as strong as it could be. And there are many faculty that engage with the community. I'm one of them, but in general, I think because it's a research one, whatever institution, that it's looking at, a larger landscape, like the whole earth. And they're, kind of competing with all those other research one institutions that are out there,
yeah,
um, to have their sights on other things than just like what your community is. And that's always been a source of friction. The School of Architecture had a director a few directors ago that didn't engage with the community as much, and the community felt hurt by that. And so there's that when the students leave. I mean, everybody leaves in the summer. I try to leave for 3 weeks in June. Like it's just too much. It's nasty. And so there's some roads that you can blindfold yourself and just walk across
that's right. Right.
because the traffic just slows down in the summer.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, with all it's like different worlds, but also over time. Like it reminds me of there's like graffiti or street art or whatever you want to call it, where it will be like 40 years worth of graffiti on graffiti on graffiti, and then people will come and they'll peel away some layers so you can see the different time periods, it's like an archaeological, site. Um, and that's kind of what I felt when I was in Tucson, where you had like um, the old Frank Lloyd Wright buildings. You had sort of like mid-range, like EGs and Brawleys and like the older commercial areas, and then like the new. Um, I thought it was really neat, but then I was looking at your Old Nogales highway project, where you're kind of like time binding that space for people. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that project.
Yeah, that project was trying to investigate a road that leaves town. And with Tucson, it's a road, it's a road that goes off into the desert, into other places. And the thing about time with that is like when you look at these old maps of Tucson or Arizona in general, there's like a name for a place like every um I don't even know what the distance would be, but probably a half a day's journey, right? Like on a horse. So
Yeah,
not that far. And all those places are gone. Like it just doesn't exist anymore. And the the roads that like go to Ajo or go to Nogales, go to Phoenix, go to Bisbee. I mean, some of them have drastically changed. The ones to Ajo and Bisbee are mildly same, but the one down to Nogales, there's such a connection between Nogales and Tucson, and there has been over the years. When I was a grad student, I did kind of a study on the Jewish community in Tucson, and the first synagogue in Arizona was built on the south side of downtown. And people from Nogales, the Jews from Nogales would come up, stay at hotels during the high holy days, and they and businesses had a lot of relationships. And even today, you go to the malls on the weekends and you see tons of plates from the state of Sonora on all the automobiles. And so there's this constant like communication and travel that's going back and forth. And I always wondered like what it was like, before the interstate highway system, and and what that appearance was. And I was just fascinated with the contemporary version. And that you leave downtown and you go through South Tucson and the south side of the city, and which is primarily Hispanic. I mean, Tucson is 50% Hispanic, so it's just a huge impact of between the Anglo and Hispanic communities. And then you go into some desert, but then you get into these incredibly large agricultural fields of pecans. Um, and then finally you get, to the river, and then you get to the highway that leads you to Nogales, which had left. And so it's just a mix of like the agriculture and the Hispanic community and the downtown area, and how that stuff is either stayed or there's a vestige of it, like there's all these weird like things. And then there's the level of just leaving a city. And so like when I lived in Chicago and I went to the University of Illinois, you'd take this highway down to the U of I, and you'd go through these towns and then these farmlands, and then you'd hit a little tiny town here and there. And it's just like something experientially about that moving from place to place, I think is just absolutely fascinating, especially looking at like the infrastructure that's associated with it, be it agriculture or small business or regional shopping centers, or like how do we decide, to make this landscape the way that we've made it. And that's all Nogales was. It was really just a discovery project. And most of my projects are a discovery project. Like I just go into it not really knowing what I'm going to get into, and I leave not really knowing what I got into, other than accumulating kind of this information. The other cool thing about that project was I sent out a call to a lot of people I know to just write me a story about Tucson, about either downtown or about going, about that idea of leaving, on a road away from town. And so people wrote in just all sorts of funky kind of things that are either, about stray dogs, about downtown used to be a place where you used to actually go shopping for clothes and gloves and things like that, to just like the environment on like how the sun orients with the streets. So that was all folded into a thing. And one of the big things that kind of got folded into this project was this concept of nostalgia and this idea of change and trying to reminisce about the past in a variety of ways that, can be productive or negative depending on who you are and how you're looking at it.
Yeah. I always wonder about what it means to be from a place. Like when you tell somebody I'm from Chicago, that is going to interact with your identity differently than if you tell people you're from Tucson. So I'm curious, what does it mean when you tell people I'm from Tucson? What does that sort of prime inside your own identity?
I don't know. That's a good question. I like right now, um, I have a lot of things I'm thinking about with that question. Right now, Tucson, I'm getting older. I'm like 55 now. When I was doing a lot of like the downtown stuff, I had a restaurant downtown, all that stuff. It was like, I was in my 30s. And now there are these people that are coming to town after COVID and just whatever because of Tucson is what it is. It's like I'm no longer part of like that scene, that I used to be part of.
Yeah.
And so like when I say I'm from Tucson, I don't know what that means to people. Um, it's like Tucson has an identity of being kind of an outpost, a small town, maybe a college town. Is it ASU or U of A that's in Tucson? Like that's the
Right. Right.
like, oh, is ASU there? Like you don't know people don't know totally about it. You say you're 45 minutes from the border and they're like always surprised.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit unknown, but at the same time, it's also known to be inexpensive, to be kind of a cool place. There was this guy that taught at the university for a year. He was from upstate New York and went to Columbia. And at the end of his year, I was having coffee with him and I was like, so what'd you think? Like, how was Tucson for you? He's like, God, I thought there'd be a lot more cool shit going out in the desert. Like I think there's some people that think like there's like it's Joshua Tree, like there's artists like
Yeah.
building like Burning Man shit, like or whatever. Like there's a little bit of that scene to it. But also like, when I say I'm from Chicago, I'm really not from Chicago. I'm from Lake Forest, and that's like this
Yeah.
small suburb town north of the city. And when I first left there, I was always cautious to like even say I was from Lake Forest because it has like a bad rap, depending on who you're talking to, or a good rap, whatever. But I just didn't want to be identified with, upper white middle class WASP, whateverness that Lake Forest conjures up. So, I guess I'm proud, to be from Tucson. Like I think it's a cool place. I don't know if I'd ever leave here. It's the only thing that makes me think about that is, climate change, but it's like, well,
Yeah.
where would you go otherwise?
Yeah. If you, if you, I don't know if you are or you aren't, but if you were the sort who believed that your hopes would impact the future of Tucson, what would you hope Tucson, where would you hope Tucson would be moving towards in the next 10, 20 years?
Well, one of the things that I have been doing that because of the amount of time that I've been doing this work in terms of the exhibitions, like a lot of the exhibitions and the publications are really about the landscape and the built environment and what we decide to do on that environment. And so like last year, I was part of, I helped instigate a change in the parking regulations. And so like on my gravestone, I will put Bill reduced the parking regulations for anything up to 5 units. Like that, I'm happy about that.
Nice.
If I can instigate more change and policy wise in terms of getting the landscape different or developed differently, um, that would be absolutely wonderful. And I think the community is ready for it. Our state legislature recently just passed a bill, which was really poorly written, requiring cities to do more multifamily housing. And so I'm working with the city this fall to figure out how to implement that. And so like there are things involved with that I can still do exhibits, like the notions of private property is completely fucked up, right? Like, am I allowed to swear on this
You
podcast?
do what you want, Bill.
Um,
Yeah.
so the notions of private property are completely screwed up. They are at odds with what it means to be a community. And I'm not going to change that. I know I'm not going to change that, but I can do an exhibit or a book about that.
Yeah.
But I can change how we think about and use the right of way, which is the public way. And I can talk to the city about that. I know people and staff, I know people, the political council people, and have discussions with that and work to change that. And so I guess what I've learned over the years is how to pick my battles and who to pick my battles with.
Yeah.
Um, and try that. And the people that I can, work with just about everybody, I'm always hats off to them. I don't understand how they can do it because there's some true, diehard wingnuts out there that don't want to see change,
Yeah.
don't think change is for the good.
Are those a lost cause, or is there a way to sway those folks?
I think it's a lost cause.
Yeah.
I really do. I recently had a project where the client, so I'm an architect, and I have regular architecture projects um, outside of this art practice stuff. And a client wanted to do a change of use to her building that would increase the parking. And you can go through a public process where you talk about it with the neighborhood, and then you receive their comments and you make changes if you need to, and it goes through the city, and the city makes a decision based on everything that they've heard. So it's a nice, like community engaged process. I was getting like 10 hateful letters before I even made a presentation.
Yeah.
And so I looked at the code again, and I figured out a way that my client can do the project without having to talk to the neighbors. And I immediately canceled the meeting. And, of course, a couple of neighbors contacted me and said, "Why did you cancel the meeting? We deserve to know. We've been working hard on this." Just
Yeah.
like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Like, and so those people, I don't think I would ever have I would never have a fruitful conversation with about it.
Is it mostly just kind of like decentralized, you know, old school neighbors, or is it also like more entrenched moneyed interests who are, lobbying to, not have a change happen?
No, I think it's just individuals
Just
that
individuals.
are NIMBYs.
Yeah.
And it's like, every single comment that you always get, it's like, well, not that I'm against this, but
Not right here. Right.
right. And
Yeah.
so it just becomes, and I've asked the city staff that I'm so impressed with how they deal with the public. Sometimes there's a few people within the planning department that I just think they take happy pills
Yeah.
because I don't understand how they can like function.
Yeah.
And so like I was like, do you listen to some of these people? Like, and she's like, yes. And I'm like, and you just let them talk, and then you go on. And she's like, yes. And we don't necessarily need to provide any sort of rebuttal or anything or commentary. It just need to let them talk and you move
Need
on.
to be heard.
Because
Yeah.
they understand that they're not going to change anybody's mind.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I guess the value of just being heard maybe is the solution for some people. And then till the next time.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, unless the thing that they're being heard about goes in the wrong direction from their point of view, then they
Yeah.
then they get on the horn to elected officials.
Well, yeah, I'm always impressed with the people who are able just to like sit in the middle of the Leviathan and take it. Like I'm not that sort of person either. So I'd be a terrible, public lawyer or something. So
Yeah.
um I think it's all really interesting, and I think everybody's going to be rooting for you. I think, who listens to this, they're going to be rooting for you to be able to affect the sort of change that you'd like to affect. You've made me feel very nostalgic and at the same time future oriented, which, you know, we do a lot of work with how do we blend those time perspectives so that people don't feel nihilistic about the future, but they're, able to look in the past and they see that change has happened in the past and they can carry that forward, even though it happens more slowly than what anybody would like. So um, I appreciate you being on with us and sharing this vignette into your life and into Tucson. If anybody's interested, it's workerincorporated.com. And yeah, send us any questions you have. Bill, feel free to promote this however you like.
Yeah, and I totally appreciate having you give me the platform to talk about whatever I do. So
Right on.
thank
It's a small but growing platform. Yeah. Yeah. All right, Bill. I'm going to stop the recording here.